February 29, 2020, excerpt from a published report titled Working with the GNCP Population Within the Opening Doors Framework. After World War II, several well-meaning European policy makers set about to establish housing initiatives for gender non-congruent people, homosexuals and transsexuals, as a protection from the external world. These initiatives expanded out beyond Europe, hitting our shores in 1952. After the initial success of the New South Wales Commission, the state of Victoria went on to establish their own, transferring CAMPBEL, the emergency housing slum of Royal Park, into new hands. This housing commission opened in 1955 and closed in 2019. The consequences of these policies have been widely speculated as the key reason behind the failure of the gender non-congruent people, GNCP, to uphold a sustaining political movement. Unlike many other marginal groups, the fight for protection amongst the GNCP population have been extremely scarce and inconsistent. The few protests from the GNCP population that have taken place were met with great mockery on both sides of the political spectrum. Wider public opinion has shown some shifts since the inception of these initiatives. However, no great strides have been taken to validate the position of the homosexual and transsexual as a positive contributor to Australian society. March 20th, 2015, letter regarding invasive species addressed to the Honorary Lily D'Ambrosio. There has been a noted large and growing colony of Heliaceous anus flowers in the lower corner of the circle partition of the park west of Gatehouse Street. It appears to be spreading fast towards the northern end of the circle and towards the protected areas of the skink land. Heliaceous flowers are understood to take on land quickly and spread fast on vacant lots where they were kept in the garden once prior to a building being demolished, which includes this area of the park due to the recent demolition here in 2012. The presence of these flowers, along with other invasive species, interrupt the rehabilitation efforts currently undertaken in collaboration with the City of Melbourne and Serco's Citizen Services to establish this corner of the park as environmentally safe and publicly usable for recreation again. We asked the Minister to provide further services through the CSRIO to establish a complete, full report and to bring on a new program to take care of these colonies of plants that continue to invade the public land. July 17th, 2018, letter regarding identified sharing entities under DSG services. We are writing to you on the basis of seeking clarification on the nature of identified sharing entities for divergent sexuality and gender or DSG clients. It is unclear to us as a housing service who have not been previously working with DSG clients what is currently best practice regarding participation in these forms of information sharing. We are namely concerned that one of our clients is currently receiving medical intervention and altering sex presentation without access to appropriate DSG-specific housing to help uphold their safety in this process. Is it necessary to report this type of behaviour, and to whom should we report this? October 27th, 2012. Referral letter. Thank you for seeing my patient. She is a 63-year-old woman who has a known history of lesbian attractions and relationships. She has lived within grounds 32 years and has been an active part of the community previously. She states that she believes she has chronic fatigue and has been spending much of the last decade in bed and has not been as active as she has been in her youth. She claims that she needs to use a wheelchair to get here today. She has no history of leg injuries. She claims her previous doctors diagnosed her with chronic fatigue, but that this is not her current doctor, as he is retired. I am asking for further support to help again begin a plan for re-engagement for this patient. 26th of September 2005, letter regarding the theft of a Honda two-stroke utility motor mower, serial number 20 25029 from Facility Park grounds between 2:25 and 2:45 on 26/9/05. The above-mentioned motor mower was stolen on 26th of September 2005 between the time stated, while the General Assistant in charge of the equipment took an afternoon tea break. An immediate search of the area and questioning of staff failed to locate or explain the disappearance of the mower. April 7th, 2012, letter regarding the escaped juvenile participants. There's a missing page there. So apparently we will not know about that. June 16th, 2019. Journal entry. The way it rises up from the ground and announces itself as the thing standing between you and a view of the sky makes this thing a building 4 stories high with a flat roof. Its windows are new. You can tell this by the quality of their gold tint, the same as the one they now put on skyscrapers. But the thing is as brutalist and as 20th century as you can get in any part of the world. And the thing about the golden tint is that looking at the building windows straight on can make it seem like early dusk at any time of day, which to me is both beautiful and wrong. There are buildings like this everywhere on the edge of the park, built at a similar time by similar men with similar goals. You can't enter them unless you work in one. Serco has one, CSL has one, the Parkville campus have 2. They are demigods and they will be here forever. There's also the case of the 2 leftover high-rise residential flats built at similar times of the brutalist office buildings. These 2 jut out at you and block out the sun at certain times of day. They won't be here forever. The children's hospital that looks out from the southernmost point is unlike these buildings because it has been rebuilt in the decade. The children's hospital's old building was demolished in 2012. One of the conditions of the Housing Commission's existence in the park, the same park as the Children's Hospital, is that the southern ovals were to be returned to original condition from the housing that was there before. This didn't happen. That is so none of the loosely named asks can impinge on families walking their sick children up for a day at the zoo. Most of the southernmost land is slowly returning to grasslands now, with the exception of a kept family area and playground right outside the hospital. What was there way before was a slum, and then before it was a military base that housed 10,000 or so Americans during World War II. It is important to note that the juvenile justice facility on the northwest border of the park is only a few meters away from a section of the commissioned land. Everything south of Park Street is considered part of the Housing Commission in some capacity or another, adhering to the borders set out by the old guard as to what is and what is not parkland. You can tell you're in the park by 2 things. 1, the difference in the architecture, namely its newness. An example of this is Park Street, which sits on the northern border between the park and the rest of the city. The north side of Park Street is mainly well-kept, skinny Victorian townhouses, but everything on the south side of Park Street, everything in the Commission was built in the 60s and 70s. It's brick apartment block after block along with a couple of new privately owned houses, concrete rendered with broad tin roofs and big windows that you can just see through the eucalyptus trees. The difference between the 2 sides of the street is striking to the least trained of eyes. You can also tell you're in the park because of the roads. For the most part, the roads here were never paved. This is because of environmental concerns and as a desire of some groups to return the land to its original form. The roads here are gravel and dust, with those kinds of steel trapezoid barrier gates on each road heading out onto any main road. It's the park ranger's job to lock the gates up at night. They are not very reliable with this. Contrary to popular belief, you can't get around the park very easily. This is partially because of the terrain itself, which has quite a few cliffs and hills, partially because of the tram and train tracks and the busy main roads that run through it, and partially because of the likes of the zoo, which take up a large amount of space and can only be passed through easily if entry is paid. The upfield train that goes through the park, through a kind of small gorge surrounded by cliffs and then through a trough on a steep hill, has no bridge over it. Its only crossing is near the zoo. The tram tracks may not cause an obvious diversion, but some infrastructure can be surprisingly obstructive. To visit a friend on the other side of the park can often mean taking a very long way round, several kilometers, even if the line from you to them is only 500 meters.
Thank you, Campbell. Thanks, Campbell.
Have I don't think you have. All right, I'll do that because it's like it's fun. All right. It's called Winnie the Pooh trips, falls and dies, and I stay home. Winnie the Pooh trips in every episode. He is just so predictable like that. Something most people don't know about him though is that because he touches his face a lot when he is in deep thought, and because he is a deep thinker, he has problems with his skin. Like a teenage club rat, he has depressions. They're small, but they're there in between the fur. This is one of a few things we have in common. Unlike me though, Pooh chases butterflies like nobody's watching, eats honey with his hands, never mind the fur, and most of all, Pooh doesn't let this kind of thing affect his self-esteem. Although he lives rural, he's usually pretty easy to find, seated below the biggest gum tree or by the creek. Pooh's comfort in any kind of country is obvious. I feel out of place in the bush, especially in comparison to him. Wheeling a lightweight suitcase because I have come from the city, bouncing it awkwardly across the rocks, it gathers scratches. Like a rickshaw in a ball pit, it just doesn't fit in, gets stuck, drags. Winnie the Pooh wants to come to a kink party with me in the CBD, which is why I've come to fetch him. We have a mutually beneficial relationship of verse mentor and mentee. Because I am only 25 and Pooh is 93, he teaches me about life, and I teach Pooh about all things sexual because Pooh is a virgin. Pooh says that though he has visited many volcanoes, he has never been a volcano. He says that all he wants is to erupt, like a cane toad run over by a car. What he wants is an orgasm that feels like the first time, but even better, something to bring him back to life. He has realized coming is more intense than honey. Like a driver, Pooh is entirely confident he can handle anything, so is excited for the kink party. I find him leaning against the big gum tree, fashioning a painful-looking strap-on out of bits of spinifex, bark, and one very long, thin stick. Looking at him, his little round head bowed, paws fumbling, I feel a powerful but unidentifiable feeling rise up inside of me. Something to do with longing, maybe, but nothing to do with sex. Hello, Pooh. I try to greet him cheerfully because truly I am happy to see him. But as my mouth stretches upwards into some kind of smile, I suddenly feel as though I might cry. Pooh's eyes rest on me for just a moment before returning to his project. Hello, cat, he says, his voice unmistakably gay. Pooh's skin seems to be in a good state, but my own is atrocious, virtually peeling off from my new medication, objectively much worse than it's ever been. I've stayed in the city for almost 6 months straight, breathing the air and being around inauthentic trees, plants planted in plastic. My only respite a walk up a riverbed with a couple who nurture a remnant rainforest. And though the walk was beautiful, though they knew things about the land, I couldn't help but fixate on the wording of it all. Remnant rainforest, as in, this is all that remains. The implication is a certain lack of touch, but these people have had their hands all over it. But yes, my skin is always worse in metropolitan areas. Luckily, I don't feel self-conscious with Pooh though. It's mainly just around others that I feel that way, which is why tonight I've decided to wear a mask to the kink club. Sitting down near but not quite next to Pooh, I say, people like to put sparkling water in teardrop-shaped glasses, or glasses that look like they're about to fall over, and I don't know why. There is a brief pause during which Pooh is thinking and touching his face. I feel my own hand fly to my own face as if attached to a string. Located just below the left corner of my lip is my favourite crater at the moment. I finger it lovingly and wait for a while. Pooh has found a good spot too on his forehead. I'm overwhelmed by a sudden desire to wrap my arms around his firm, round tummy. They like the glasses because then they can see the bubbles, Pooh eventually says, unaware of my urges. He removes his paw and places it neatly in his lap. And as for the rest, I suppose some people just like to feel a little precarious. Like a mirror, I remove my own hand. I just don't know why it matters so damn much, Pooh. People smile at me in the street and I don't know why. I'm honestly on the verge of a breakdown. Pooh rubs his right paw on the grass, fiddling. He finds a blade he likes and concentrates. As his face changes expression, the pockmarks on his skin squish. Closer together, further apart this way and that. After a minute of this, he turns his black dots to me. His eyes always a sideways colon, like. He gives me his passive, doctorly smile, as if to say, I'm not sure what any of this has to do with me, as if to say, what time is the train to the city? We've talked about this before. I say I'm getting fired up now. I'm from the city and you are from the country. I am human and you are animal. But like you, I have no real origin story. And like you, I don't identify with my family. Are your parents still alive? You never speak of them. I'm very, very humble, just like you are. Big brass gates and infinity driveways, that's not me. I left dress-ups in 2001. I identify with you, Pooh. You're always waiting for Christopher Robin and I'm always waiting for something. And you're just so confident. With your skin and you're still such a public figure. I just wish I could be like that. I guess I just felt some kind of kinship with you because of your skin condition, because I have a similar thing, as you know. But I raised myself from the entire world because of my skin. If you Google my name, you won't find a thing. I care about things you wouldn't know anything about, Pooh says coolly, his eyes like. We have nothing in common. We're just coming at this from different angles. I say this with fervor, but I can feel myself sort of deflating. Can't you see how we're both outsiders of a sort? Are you native to the 100-acre wood, and do you miss it there? All you humans do is underestimate and objectify me, says Pooh. The last time I went to the city, a girl was surprised that I knew the song Landslide by Fleetwood Mac. I'll just stop now.
Is that not the whole thing?
There's like a few more pages, but
Yeah.
it's like not. Because
She sits down to sip her drink and runs a finger through a small settlement of dust on the base of a ruby-red glass lamp. I have always loved watching the way dust floats in sunlight, often behind windows flocking from its previous home on heavy draped curtains. I remember the curtains in my mother's room in our first house. They were thick, heavy tan fabric that blocked out the sun. She liked to sleep in the dark. I remember being small and these curtains looking larger than life, like they could engulf me, losing track of where I had gone inside of them. When I grew up, the curtains didn't seem that big anymore, but by our second house, they had slinked into my room. They didn't do as good a job at blocking out the sun. I kept no record of dust in that house though, but maybe I am remembering it wrong. If I were to tell you that the revolting truth that epidermal skin cells make up a portion of dust's accumulation and that they are a breeding ground for many bacterial feasts, I would like to think that you would still be mesmerized as it floated in the sunlight after having pulling back your curtains or your sheets. The body is similar inherently. It excretes and collects. Oh wait, no, sorry. The body is similarly inherently this disgusting leaking thing, made up of a flesh suit dotted with its orifices through which to consume, excrete, and collect. Yet the body is often what is longed for the most, to ravage and be ravaged in all our seeping, mucus-filled glory. Lined with cobwebs, the top pane is rain-spotted and covered in dust, a solid haze of grey amongst the rippled blue-tinged glass and spots of birdshit. Dust has a habit of being wiped away, but it is also collected, swept into piles, in a pan, in a bin, in the corner of a room. Finally, yesterday, I had time to clean my room, a task I have neglected often since childhood. I do not mind living amongst messes of things, piles of clothes, books, pieces of paper. Perhaps it reminds me of all the tiny apartments I lived in growing up, or maybe I just see no point in cleaning something that will eventually return to its true, strewn form. A clean room hides the liveliness of a body, bodies. Dusting is a job I never took to. I enjoy watching the spiderwebs collect in the corner of my window. I say good morning to the spider every day when I pull up my blinds and back my curtains. Dust reminds me of childhood chores, of emptying the vacuum cleaner. Since I left home, Mum reports that her partner does not do as thorough a job of vacuuming as I did. It was the job I liked most of all, for the satisfaction I got at the end as I pulled apart its compartments, revealing all the grey splendor. A thunderstorm of cottontails littered with hair, safety pins, and cat fur. Dust is dust, but it is also everything it accumulates. Empty the collection into the bin, then pull the filter out to dust over the balcony. Watch as flecks of dust float away into the sunlight. Dust as something that speaks to the everyday, of the minuscule, of the process of time. I want to talk about the accumulation and smallness of dust. It knows these things well. All it is what grows from the minuscule. It is a patient accruer, waiting to collect what we and our bodies throw away. It is the landfills hidden from our cities and the collections under my bed. Does dust speak to Father Time or the Angel of Death? They are both in the business of collecting as well. Father Time appears with his scythe and hourglass, sand forever slipping, a reminder of time's eternal cycle, like a Mobius strip. There is no end to the loop of time. It is only us that jump off this mortal coil. The other day when you emailed me an image of your 3D render of your Mobius strip, your obsession, it reminded me of entropy, at least my understanding of entropy, that everything is expanding, going through infinite cycles of birth and breakdown. That when we die, our bodies will return to the earth to be feasted on by soil and bugs, excreted and pulverized down to our particle forms, to dust. Through this all, while we are dead, we live on in the bellies of something, in the fruit of the earth, ever expanding. I might leave that there. Yeah, that's awesome.
Thank you. All right, hit it.
Hit it. So it's called For and of Clay, The Golem of Prague and Modes of Jewish Resistance. And all the names have been changed for anonymity's sake. Years ago in Prague, I saw the old Jewish quarter and its cemetery. The graves lean on one another. They are grey and moss-grown. I saw Theresienstadt too, the hybrid ghetto concentration camp. Walking around there, it was hardly the fairy tale landscape that Prague's buildings are described as by so many. I did not see a fairy tale, though it is undoubtedly beautiful. I saw the blood, made invisible by time, which flowed in the cobblestone, and I could not cry for as hard as I tried. I had not known how I would respond when I would eventually come to see crematoria and train tracks and barbed wire in my travels. I had not known if the years of Jewish education had maybe numbed me through images of ragdoll bodies being dumped on top of each other. But now, years later, having not cried does not convince me that I am numb, for I am now angry. I'm searching for Jewish resistance everywhere, as we are gunned down in our places of worship, as our Muslim brothers and sisters in theirs. We Jews know that we serve as a good canary down the coal mine for violence against other minority groups. Tree of Life was attacked specifically because of the recurrent Jew puppeteer myth, the story that it is in fact Jews who are orchestrating the flow of refugees. Usually, if the Jews are in trouble, everybody else is probably in trouble too. Naturally, not long later was the Christchurch massacre, an Australian export, no less. It is through this that I am tapping into an urgency demanded of us by the reversion in the political reality, an urgency to resist or perish as we have before. As I search, what is most prominent in its voice is not a politics of resistance, but a politics of settling. And that is a word here which seems to have two meanings: the politics of Zionism. The loudest voice in the room of Jewish politics is undoubtedly Zionism. And in times where this violence against Jews rises still and fascists are stirring, it must be appraised as any other politics must. Indeed, I've had to appraise it my whole life. It was Zionism that was imposed upon me from my childhood at school, through Gilad Shalit's scripted public appearance, or the celebration of Israeli Independence Day, or Nakba as a day off. That twofold settling, even as a child, seemed obvious, as we would learn from energized young Israelis garrisoned at our school, teaching us, perhaps in the way that youth pastors work among Gentiles. Though, of course, the occupation wall was always an unfortunate precaution, and the death toll in Gaza merely collateral damage. My politics has become activated in another way after the discovery of the revolutionary tradition through my family. Whether serving alongside Nelson Mandela on the treason trial, or further back still in the old shtetl and pale of settlement, my family has had in it a revulsion exactly toward the kind of atrocities that Zionism commits now in our modern day. I feel as though my inheriting of the Marxist politics has coincided with leaving the Jewish community in Melbourne as it stands, overwhelmingly Zionist. These days I feel more myself, but in Prague, at the site of Theresienstadt, I thought of Zionism and my family. The settler colonialism of the land, absolutely, but a settling in the other sense too, an acquiescence, a concession. I did not cry in Prague, but I know that I am not numb. I recall a potent inspiration as I entered the medieval Prague synagogue. Old Jewish folklore tells us of an automaton built there, in that synagogue, made from clay that was sculpted with ancient Kabbalistic Hebrew incantations, a hulking protector, never male nor female but something else, made from the same progenitor in our scriptures as all of us, the earth, an icon of resistance that would protect us from the blood libels which mounted all the time, and an outcome of ingenuity and self-determination, the golem. The golem offered a mythological figure of hope to Jews through the blood libels, the lies that Jews ritualistically killed Christian children and used their blood to bake matzah bread over Passover. A story as preposterous as it sounds, but even where it is not outright believed, though make no mistake that in some corners it is, it persists today as background radiation for Gentiles' mistrust of Jews. A story derived out of suspicion of Jews' isolationist position in our early shtetls, a seed much like the Judas betrayer story, which grew into murder and pogroms. As I stepped around inside the synagogue, these ideas around the golem fascinated me, even if today they are sold as kitsch necklaces to tourists by street vendors. I was engrossed by the legend that, to this day, the golem lies dormant in the attic of that synagogue. I stood just below it, picturing its sheer mass perhaps gathering dust or coated by cobwebs, the stories of SS soldiers who had combed that place and were never found, the tales of its magics. This image of the slumbering, unassailable resistance fighter has stayed with me since. In my mind, it has grown with me. The golem seems like the Jewish people's perfect symbol of resistance once again. It is strong, it is made of the ecology itself, offering an image of acknowledgement of our growth from the earth as opposed to a dominion over it, a symbol of existence of life and spirituality outside of gender binary, its creation loaded with Jewish perseverance. It occurs to me that we should all be a golem, or at the very least the golem is what we should be fighting for. These values are at the core of Judaism, even if you are not religious. They've always been at the core of the tradition of revolutionary Jews anyway, and they are the values imbued into the golem which are required of us to survive. Prague was years ago. I returned with a grim attitude, but the golem lay and slept interned in my mind for years, as they say it has in its attic, and no more does it press me than on this day, where I am schlepping southward toward a house party of an old Jewish friend. In more ways than one, I have extricated myself from the Jewish community, but one of those ways is certainly geographic. I left the southeastern suburb, and the occasions are few and far between where I visit these parties, but this one interested me. I knew that a man would be attending whom I had not seen for years. Eli, an old schoolmate who had eventually made Aliyah, or had immigrated to Israel. More than this, he had joined and served in the Israeli army. But today, images of its architecture, Prague's architecture, and the golem and what it might be to embody one surely are floating around my mind as I approach the house, and know that eventually I would have to hear that loudest voice in the room of political discourse, that this time it would be Eli's voice, but the points would be all the same. When I arrive at the party, I see Eli standing in the backyard. He approaches and we exchange platitudes. I notice the strange expressions on his face with a swinging jaw. The small talk evaporates and he gets to it. We called it the dildo, Eli tells me. I am familiar with what he's talking about, but he explains it. Before he explains it, but I let him. Everyone here is in blue dress shirts and khakis and Chelsea boots. The vertical foregrip on the M4 carbine, it has a built-in extendable bipod, he shouts, as his eyes roll into the back of his skull for a moment, and it is difficult now and then to hear him over the sound of the beat that drives into the crowd. I know our politics probably aren't very compatible, but these people don't get it, he says, gesturing at them, our old school friends. They don't know anything about politics. The synth whines and he shudders in empathogenic raptures. I have respect for the liberal movement. I know the Palestinian people aren't my enemy. The bad guys are the old guard. I'm not sure what liberal movement he is talking about as he tries to extend an olive branch to me. Perhaps the American drum circle brand, the I'm with her brand, the we need more billionaires of color brand. I'm not sure what he means here about the Palestinian people either, their reduction into some ignoble, seething mass, monolithically susceptible to the propaganda that Eli knows I know all too well, for of course we had been shown at school. The costumed children's characters who instruct on suicide vests, the IDF footage of Hezbollah children with rifles, a tapestry of images which cumulatively serve to convince generations of children in Jewish institutions that the sum of the Palestinian liberation movement is shrill and armed and coming for you specifically, that it is frightening, that it is the aggressor, the instigator, that it can only be criticized, and woe betide thee. Cornered beside a potted palm by the swimming pool, I look at the crowd that aims their sideward reverent glances at him, now inducted into the same canon of stoic heroes as the settlers who toiled the land and hardened their hands on the shafts of spades and mattocks so long ago. The men and women in black and white photos on the walls of the Hebrew classes I shared with these people, now adults. Smiling, broad-shouldered farmers with Mauser rifles slung safari-style among desert shrubs. Eli has become a soldier, but more than that, he has become a veteran, a prodigal son that has returned, and they all look at him without really knowing how to talk to him now that he has. I would see the pictures of him on Facebook in his olive drab BDUs and slung rifle of his own, standing at the Kotel or some barracks in our modern day. I would always imagine him stationed at a pillbox, sweating and throb-hearted in the heat, ruining the day that he had joined. Of his own volition, too. No conscription, no national service at the risk of jail time. The lone soldier is what they call them. I had 4 alone in my year level at school. A turn of phrase so Hollywood, so inflated with veneration, it bursts at the seams. But I've done enough house raids, seen enough kids' bedrooms and their textbooks to know that the brainwashing is the problem, he says, his foot tapping. A man with a slicked back undercut in wide sunglasses and a singlet puts his hands up as he stands over the DJ booth, and the synth begins to climb in octaves, pulsatile. I remember Eli as a boy before any of this. Eli, by all accounts, had been a nudnik. We would get in trouble through some insolence against our teachers or some cruelty against our peers, and of course kids handle the situation in different ways. Some kids will point the finger and blame their collaborators. Some might cop it on the chin and sit silent attentions. But Eli was a scrambler. It was what he had always done and what he was best at. He was admittedly a small boy, and he had the longest record on the beep test. And more than that stamina, he was fast. Fastest sprint in the year level, in fact, and standing there cornered at the pot plant beside the pool presented with him once again, it was clear. Clear that it was the way that it was always going to go. The hushed inanities among fellow Jews milling around at parties when I would see them now and again, whispering about how he was struggling, how the family had maybe always been a little bit troubled. It was clear that as he had grown, as he had maybe come to smoke more and more weed and life's malaise and uncertainties weighed on him, he was always going to be scrambling somewhere. Should I cut it? Is that too long?
keep going if you want. Yeah.
Okay. Of course, Eli was not the only one who faced such uncertainty. We folks at home had seen photos of schoolmates in high echelon special operations units with faces blurred. We had seen the glowing youthful grins in other photos when they ascended in rank or were awarded a particular beret color or epaulette. A handful of kids who bought a plane ticket, uprooted their lives, and joined that foreign military. Not because they got the letter in the mail, but because they wanted to. Anyway, I was a combat medic, specialized as a sharpshooter in taking down moving targets at about 400 meters. When I was in Israel, I didn't see war, and I certainly didn't see occupied Gaza or the West Bank. But as he says this, news footage of protruding rebar and charcoal-faced children and the screams of jet fighters and the rumble of tank columns flash in my mind. Picturing Eli amongst all of it as he stands before me truly does disturb me. Amongst all of it behind the sights of a rifle with his hand firmly clutching the dildo, no less. I remember also, as he tells me this, standing at assembly singing Hatikva and the Kaddish with the names of the concentration camps inserted once a year, the Hebrew I would speak at school regularly too. I picture Eli out in some desert somewhere, perched on a rock with a dextroamphetamine pill coursing through him to keep him awake for some 3-day convoy ambush, maybe whispering in Hebrew to camouflaged men supine beside him. What camaraderie they might be exchanging, what jokes about the icy night or pebbles against their dicks they might be making. But the words are lost to me after all these years. Standing there, I both wish they were not lost to me and take pride in the fact that they are, all at the same time. Hebrew does not sit well with me as a communist Jew. It is nothing short of amazing that it has been revived, absolutely. However, its co-opting by the settler colonial state of Israel, which enforces new forms of apartheid, instills in me and others the feeling that it has been tainted. The Star of David, too. Just this month there was an outcry among pride parades over Jewish flags, a demand that they ought to not fly the star superimposed over the rainbow. This has been a long-standing discussion among Jewish comrades of mine, where we ought to derive our symbology, and whether being anti-statist should mean that we should look to diasporic Yiddish imagery instead of harping on rehabilitating the easier ones that Zionism has chosen, where we can look to for images of resistance against our brutalizing through history. The singing men who sung "We Will Outlive Them" as they were shot by Nazis above the graves they had dug for themselves. "Wir wollen sie überleben," the partisan marching song "Sag nicht kein Mal," all evocative but not visual semiotic. Perhaps the flag of the Polish partisan army with its anchor we had pondered but rejected, for they were never monolithically Jewish, and were often a worse enemy than the Nazis for their knowledge of the forests and a sizable contingent's hatred of Jews. One symbol we have come to value, though, is the Golem of Prague. It was begrudging at first, as we saw the futility in claiming the star, but now we see it with warmth. For how uninspired a solution to our liberation Zionism is, and Eli too, as its avatar. How unimaginative and how half-measured its objectives, the walls of its citadel which loom and cast an imprisoning shadow. How shameful its scar on the earth and our history, that we would enforce and besiege a ghetto of our own after what we have endured. How backward that we would erect the very apparatus that has marred us for so long at the hands of others, only because now it is our own. Eli is no lone soldier. He is no Jewish emancipatory hero. He is spilling his drink, weary-eyed. He is spitting on me as he talks. He and the others like him, with their blurred faces and epaulettes, are fools, suck it into a military-industrial quicksand. They wear the Star of David and the menorah on their uniforms and come home dog-tired, spent by the state, as all states spend its people, to wring them of blood and their sanity to bolster its walls and borders. The pursuit of national service under the guise of Jewish self-determination. And yet Eli does not seem so self-determined. In earnest, he seems out of control. Indeed, Israel did not give this Jew any better lot in life. It has not brought forth the reality through him either of the liberation we've labored for. He and the rest are traitors to any outcome that would see the Jews and the colonized and the queer folk and the women of the world, and sometimes all four at once, united against and surfaced above oppression, murder, and mistrust, let alone a liberation that would see no further massacres in mosques nor synagogues. The Golem of Prague, though, is a symbol as yet lost to such treachery. It is perfect, a person made from clay a resistance fighter made of the earth and ecology which made us. Eli tells me something about how his politics have softened since he actually saw war, something about the fact that a lot of the rhetoric goes out the window when you really see the violence and the suffering. He tells me about a stabbing he had attended, a Palestinian who knifed a soldier. The man was shot in the gut, and it was Eli that had kept him alive. He describes him lying on the ground bleeding through the gauze pads, describes him as going elsewhere, maybe inward, as his eyes rolled, and he describes the letter in the mail. It said something to the effect of, "Dear Eli, thanks to you I lived. I now realize the Israeli forces are there to protect us, that I would not have been shot if I did not attack them. You have shown me in your treatment of my wounds and the saving of my life," he paraphrases to me over the music, "that violence is not the answer. I will no longer be attacking Israelis. Kind regards." "That changed my life," he says. "I want to get away from war now that I am back." Anyway, I have respect for the liberal movement, more than I used to. He strikes me as having a disdain for the people in the Chelsea boots, as much as I do, but it seems to come from somewhere else, and of course he does. A boy who left to fight in a military which, like the meat grinders that all states' armies are, spat him out with the traumas of beholding an occupation. Eli hates in them all of their naivety, for it is the same naivety that put him on that plane, that put the dildo in his hands. It is the same naivety that I disdain, and Eli senses it on me. I respect it more than I used to, but don't get me started on this whole transgender thing. I wonder what might rouse the golem out of its attic nowadays, if it truly were real, and what it might do with folks like Eli, and the blurred faces, and iron domes, and tank columns, and their rumblings, and dildos. Though of course, it is not. But its image and its ideas are, and they can be realer still. From them can spring forth another voice, a voice that exists proudly, and has existed for a century, that exists without the shame of clutching for our turn behind the reins of oppression in exchange for a flimsy safety, a voice that is not surprised by an outcome of children's suicide vests as acts of resistance, a voice that has bellowed for not only the liberation of Jews but for all of us, for the workers, for the interned in tents and cages offshore, for the people who stand between trees and bulldozers on country, a voice that has shouted alongside those in the streets at the outset of black liberation from Johannesburg to Washington, D.C., a voice that has cried out for the dethroning of the idol of capital and its choking of us and the earth, a voice that cries in unison with the refugees, the dispossessed, and the abused of the world, a voice that will not settle for being a settler. Eli's eyes roll and vibrate again. Anyway, have you got me, gum? That's it. Sorry, I was like pretty
But like, you actually do the front issue thing.
Yeah. I'm just gonna read random sections from this to be screenplay. So I'm cutting out all the long narrativized chunky parts because I kind of can't be bothered reading them all. So it's mostly gonna be prose, I think, but yeah, it's supposed to be called The Puritan and the Sleaze. You just need to meet... Oh, hold on a sec. I should open. According to the Sumerian tablets, humans are a slave race. Writing. When the moon hits your eye like a big pizza pie, it's called heartbreak. Now let me tell you a story about how I managed to bar myself this summer. Puritanism. Two friends getting coffee, indoors, dimly lit. You just need to read more about sexual liberation or gender theory. I don't know, I didn't study liberal arts. Freedom of sexual expression and sexual rigor. Just don't be such a fucking traditionalist. I thought you liked Antonio Grulli, no? I can't help it that I had an identity crisis after you slept with somebody else. Like, remember when that cute Moroccan polygamist recommended I read Michel Onfray? I was so open. That was the first time I really cheated on you. But you know, fundamentally, we all hate polygamists, right? I mean, I don't want to be a purist anyway, but I am a purist. And how could I be something that I don't know anything about? I grew up in a house run by nudist performance artists, come on. I think I'm full of internalized guilt or shame for thinking that I was something other than a Puritan.
Puritanism is more about one's image of themselves and their body than it is an attempt to abide by social codes of conduct or established etiquettes. I couldn't give a fuck what you decide to do with your body unless it impacts my own ideals towards my own body. See, that's the problem. What the fuck does someone else's body have to do with your own? I don't know. Nothing. Exactly, you're not a fucking Buddha. I don't think my body is a temple, that's just crazy. Look, I love sex, really, I love fucking. It's one of the only things I'm good at. So why do I find it so hard to fuck something solely for the sensationalism of it? I can't even use a vibrator, you know, what am I missing? Like, what's wrong with me? Your pseudo-fucking integrity, aka a duped idea of sexual conduct due to a strong lack of physical intimacy during early developmental years. Okay, so if I sleep with people I find revolting for an extended period of time, will I finally get over this sexual righteousness? Probably not. Yet when one is so deprived of something, the mere idea of its tangibility becomes so loaded and desired, so obsessed over, but not necessarily for the right reasons. Can you be obsessed with something that you despise? Yes, because hatred is derivative of love, and love is the strongest force, and hate is pain, and love is hate, and love is pain, baby. I've told you this before. I'd love to hate you. It's the time to live, the age to remain alive. What are we trying to prove? I can't answer that right now, but I don't think young people kill themselves so much anymore. If only I could tell you what to be without you. Every morning I wake up and I am in control of what I want and what I eat. And there is no such thing as a just state of exile. I am not trying to be anything. I start my day at 6:30 p.m. I go to university for dinner, and I symbolically and routinely fuck myself in the ass whenever the opportunity arises. You fail to recognize so much of me. I would rather be in love, but I'm not trying to be anything. I told you I would never leave you, and I think I lied. Emotional polyamory is an austere condition of being a theory student. You're horny but paranoid. I'm this and I'm that. I can read, but I can't write. I've tried to break through in the real estate scene for 3.5 months now. Every day I find myself alone and panicked, like an Airbnb in the middle of the Arizona desert. Drinking coffee and listening to metal on a tram in the morning is equivalent to spending 5 hours at the gym on a Tuesday. Drinking a coffee and reading a 10-page Dyke Switch gangbang erotica piece is equivalent to spending up to 3 months in a deep but neurotically falsified love. I'm pining for you. Every time you send me an X, I feel a small pebble, probably the size of a kidney stone, shoot from my cunt to my chest and back down again. But what am I supposed to do with this information when you're a day behind and 7 hours ahead? You know, I just can't believe that I was ever really that into you, myself. I can't believe I was ever into architecture, interior design, or liberty even. There's a drifting feeling about America that makes it easier to romanticize. You have to be into yourself in order to give yourself over to somebody else. I want a boyfriend. I'm not interested in being single. I never have been. I don't need it. Desperation does not suit my personal brand. I'm listening to Harvard radio. They play good jazz and ruin it with a follow-up of post-punk. I want a job. Maybe if I get a job at a museum, someone would date me. I don't want a girlfriend. I don't have time for that shit. If I had a girlfriend, I would only want to devote myself to her and support her and really give myself over to her, because women deserve good loving. I can't look after people right now. I can only afford to share what I already have. Today I found out that the guy I've considered developing a crush on is gay. A friend said to me in solidarity, maybe he's bi, even worse. Bisexual men are just fucking indecisive and can't keep their cocks in their pants. I don't have time for that shit. I just dealt with that. I don't have time for that shit anymore. Besides, I'm enjoying self-care and being a narcissist. An intruder approaching from the bottom of your heart. It's me. Wake up, bitch, and smell the butane. As I grow older, I can only learn to realize just how in denial I am. And I fess up, and I'm clean. I don't have time to make shit up anymore. I'm pure, I swear. Noticing an increase in my interest or engagement with the literary world. It's sort of depressing because we all know poets make close to no money. And honestly, I think I chose a bad time to become an artist. Someone said something about the future of contemporary art as a junkyard that you still pay entry for. Tell me otherwise. Something that will distort my jaded idea of self-worth. Something evil about how good it feels to tell someone they'll never meet another person as amazing as yourself, or someone who will love them as much as you did. I know we're not allowed to say that kind of stuff, but the idea of saying it feels really rewarding. A woman asked me over the phone what the typical lead-up to my writing process is, so I told her the truth. I said, I go to my desk if I have the free time, I sit down, And if I'm feeling a certain kind of way, I start to write. And to be honest, I think curators are barely human. Hey, text me when you wake up. Come on, you're supposed to sleep early so that you can wake up early so we can talk nonsense before I have to sleep early because you go to work early so that I can wake up when you're about to finish work and eventually sleep so that we can continue this cycle. But not really. You should sleep whenever you want to sleep, and I should learn how to combat my unease on my own because putting that on you is a dead end. I just read that piece of writing Blank wrote. The one I sent you, it's sort of whatever. I wish I didn't know who it was about. 2 days ago I didn't know, but now I know. I should have read it with you the first time. I hate knowing. I wish I was absent or free from the artists and their insular gossip circle jerk. I want nothing to do with these artists. God, they're so insular. They have no friends, but other insular artists, and then one day they'll all just die. How tedious. How could you let your support network be so fragile? I could never depend on an artist for anything other than a decent conversation here and there. They can give advice, but not the advice that I need. And they can't look after me. They can't cook. They're all mentally unstable or too busy worrying about themselves. It's just not functional, and it's a weak system to depend on. Artists have no sense of moral conscience. A group of gunk sitting in a room like a milk tart. Culture, blah, blah. God, what have I become? It's only rewarding when you spend time with one of them over a dinner or a coffee, and never ascribe yourself to the requirements of the group. Pack mentality, go fuck yourself in the ass and kiss me goodbye. Fuck. Artists do not engage with people that they value because artists don't have a moral conscience. They just float and swerve and dance with whoever comes their way. You could apply the same argument to people with hyperanxiety or depression. There's no control and no fixed form of desire. When you hate yourself, you don't respect yourself nor others. Your moral standards drop with your self-worth, and day by day, and that's what makes them artists. They will never value someone based on their degree of loyalty, just convenience and use. They almost don't even judge or construct value systems at all, which from the surface may seem like the key to human difference or the answer to freedom, but in depth it's actually just called being vague. And vague people are unreliable. Vague people only want to satisfy their own dilemmas, and if someone dares to offer help them out, they won't know what to do with it. They're afraid of accepting love because if you help them, that means that one day down the track they may, in turn, have to help you. Call it what you want, but I think it's rigged. I do my best decision making on the toilet, for on the toilet I am truly powerless. Types of people I would be interested in fucking but not necessarily dating by profession. Economics student, law student, ceramicist, botanist, pop songwriter. Guy who thinks that he's too good for the education system but he's only getting older and still has no qualifications. Something about metafiction. It all makes sense now. It comments on its own artificiality and is quotable, and therefore is quotable. I don't want anything to do with the literary world. Fuck this shit. I want out. I want a renovated garage studio apartment in the middle of nowhere. I want to be a born-again Christian. I want to lose myself, and I want to die alone like you. A young woman in a floral dress sits in the park on a sunny day and tries to read a book larger than her own head. I fail to recognize those around me on a daily basis. If I could see you, I would. Why do so many poets write in the form of personal statement? It's a safeguard. That artist Barbara Creed did it. She's to blame. Wait, no, I mean Barbara Kruger. What does Creed have to do with it? She's just a film theorist. That's what I was thinking. It's because they both have the same first name and surname starting with a voiceless vowel stop. Duh. I have some poems I would like to read. Go ahead. Why are poets so apathetic? Today my mother told me that she was upset that her partner, a linguist, had not invited her, a poet, out to a poetry reading. She follows up by saying that she wouldn't have gone anyway, but the invitation would have been nice. I feel sorry for poets. I feel a deep sympathy for all the world's poets who call themselves poets by name and who ascribe the totality of their expressive output solely to the form of poetry. I feel, and also considering, that to be bashed of essence or so devoid of action or substance or purpose, to be in the position to have to call yourself a poet, I feel a deep sympathy for those who. And to think that you are entitled to being a poet, and to be a poet, and in being a poet, and surviving as a poet, or even dying as a poet. fucking thespian cunts. I'm too paranoid for spiritual conduct, and I will never fuck someone who calls themselves a poet. Yeah, that's it. Thank you. Thanks everyone for coming.
Thank
That's
you.
why Super and I will never be together.
Yeah, you are.